Hello, and thank you for joining us.
Hi,
Today,
how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Today, we will be speaking with Dr. Kumru Toktamış. Kumru is an associate professor of social science and cultural studies at the Pratt Institute in the United States, where her work looks at topics including political violence, women in the Muslim world, democratization, and de-democratization. Prior to this, she worked for Human Rights Watch, documenting rights abuses in Turkey for more than a decade during the 1980s and 90s, and she was a signatory of the 2016 statement of the Academics for Peace in Turkey. She has done research on the relationship between Kurdish mobilizations and the formation of the Turkish nation state, and she is the co-editor of a book entitled Everywhere Taksim, published in 2015 about the 2013 protest in Turkey. She is also a contributor to the recently published collection entitled Ecological Solidarity and the Kurdish Freedom Movement Thought, Practice, Challenges, and Opportunities, edited by Stephen Hunt. Kumru, thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay.
So,
Thank you for inviting me. Thanks a lot.
it's our pleasure. Thank you. So, as I mentioned before, you spent more than a decade working for Human Rights Watch in Turkey. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about your experiences during this work and coming out of this, what your assessments are at this point in time about the value or the viability of international human rights organizations for effecting change.
Okay, now here's the thing. 1980 military coup was really a very significant turning point in Turkish history, in the history of all the peoples in Turkey and in the region. And in a way, still, and allow me to say this, the mobilizations, the people's mobilizations prior to 1980 were immense throughout the territory. And since then, I don't think we have seen similar uprisings. We are yet to see. So it was a major crash, major repression, major breakdown of people's ability to participate. So in a way, by early 1980s, international human rights became the almost only venue to be able to voice what has been going on. I mean, especially at the time, it was less what's happening in the society, more what was happening in the prisons, in the jailhouses, and during detentions. So that became the focus of resistance, to be able to voice the torture, the repression, and the kind of prison conditions that were, which in a way we can comfortably say now that the prison conditions of the jailhouse in Diyarbakir gave birth to the Kurdish Freedom Movement of the new century, new times. So in that sense, not that it was so much central or focus of the attention, but more that it was almost the only venue. The international solidarity was the only venue for any form of resistance movement to be able to voice demands and claims. Look, we have to understand one thing. Human rights and rule of law is not only for the people, it's also for the governments to straighten themselves up, to have good governance, to have good participatory rule in their territories. So in that sense, I mean, during those years, I always knew that actually what we're doing here is we're trying to teach the Turkish state how to become a better state. Mm. So what we were doing was not, of course, it was somehow giving voice to what was going on. But at the same time, what we were doing is we were kind of trying to have a voice in how democratization, reshaping of the regime has to incorporate and include. So in that sense, I'm not going to minimize, but I'm not also going to exaggerate the role of human rights and rule of law. It's important, it's essential. And now more than ever, one more time, we understand again that rule of law is essential. So we can always come back to that in order to be able to make our claims for better governance, more participatory system. And this is the moment that, yes, we need more documentation of what's going on. I don't think only relying on the social media and the immediacy of the social media is enough to document. I think the transition to a relatively more democratic regime in mid-1980s was possible that we were so actively busy documenting or trying to document the abuses at the time. So I think I'm not definitely more than ever. We need that sort of documentation. What's happening in the jailhouses in Turkey? How many journalists are in jail? How about the local politicians? I mean, forget about the central politicians that elected people, but local politicians. So all these needs to be documented, not only academically, which is probably being done, but also at the same time be part of the human rights catalog of Turkey in 21st century.
Absolutely. And in your assessment of what is going on now, do you think that while there could always be more and there is a need for more, that the documentation that is going on now, if we take Turkey as an example, is we say sufficient is perhaps not the right word, but that they are addressing the issues that need to be addressed?
It's not. Look, I don't want to minimize the kind of work that's being done right now, but I'm not seeing a systematic documentation. Or how about, let's put it this way: I'm sure the research and documentation can be as systematic as possible. However, the international reaching out to international forums, and especially the political forums, is not that easy given the kind of appeasement, especially Europe has been giving, and even United States, give and take to the administration right now in Turkey. So that I don't think that. Unfortunately, something has changed in 1990s, I think, and human rights documentation has been pretty much instrumentalized in the international political forums. So in that sense, I'm pretty sad about that development. So right now, correct me if I'm wrong, in that instrumentalization, it's not yet being heard or established a space in the political forums of Europe and even the United States. They're just waiting for the moment to instrumentalize the human rights documentations, which is that kind of defeats the purpose, pretty much. So that's where we are when it comes to the human rights struggle and rule of law struggle.
Absolutely. It's like so much else today has been incorporated and politicized into the machinations of the whole game, really.
Certainly, yeah.
So to transition slightly, as I also mentioned, a central theme in your research has been the role of Kurdish mobilizations, particularly historically in the process of the formation of the modern Turkish state, the Turkish Republic. Can you tell us a bit about this, about what your work was, and how you understand the role played by the Kurdish population and their mobilizations in the transition from the Ottoman Empire to the Turkish Republic, and then in turn how that process set the conditions that led to subsequent Kurdish mobilizations, such as the emergence of the PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, in the 1970s, and the general form. Yeah, it is quite a large jump in time. It's true. And as well, throughout this process, the formation of Kurdish national consciousness in Turkey.
Okay. I mean, I would rather phrase that rather than end of Ottoman Empire and beginning of Turkish Republic, I would phrase that end of the Great War. Now, that was only 100 years ago. That's a very short time in human history. So yes, I said your scope is very long, but actually it's not. 100 years is not that long in human history. So the Great War, World War I, has created tremendous opportunities for, not so much for the victors, for the winners, because there were no winners of the Great War, really. Britain and France, the 19th century colonizing powers, were no longer powers. They were basically, as we say in Turkish, old wolves with no teeth, to establish their colonial rule. And the emerging powers, such as United States and Soviet Union, were nascent, were very young and not able to intervene to what was happening. So after the Great War, there was this vacuum. Elsewhere too, I'm sure an Africanist would say the same thing to you, or a Southeast Asia a researcher, but in the Middle East, there was this vacuum of, and also many opportunities for the local leaders. So Turkish Republic is a product of that vacuum. During the war, there were overlapping promises were made by the British, by the French, even Italians, to the local people. This could be trying to forge an alliance with some Turkish statespeople, or some Kurdish leadership, or some Arab leadership. But there were all these overlapping promises that were made. Now, what produced Turkish state was this very apt use of those opportunities. So what were those opportunities? I mean, we have to list them, because these opportunities, in a way, to this day, are the national security issues of Turkish state. What were they? Number one, the tremendous opportunity created by the Armenian genocide, the elimination of a people that may, and let's not forget, as Stefan Ihrig wrote about this, this was a great inspiration for the Nazis. Wow, you are purifying the nation. Of course, purifying the nation really helps the new government. I'm not saying that Turkish Republic per se responsible, but Turkish Republic tremendously benefited from the Armenian genocide. So that was number one. And number two, the exile, the purge of the Greek population. They call it population exchange, but millions of Greek-speaking people or Orthodox people were removed from Anatolia. That also contributed to the purification of a nation. So that was a tremendous opportunity as well. And finally, the pacification of not finally, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that, but in terms of the people's finally, the pacification of the Kurdish rebellions. In a way, we can say that the Kurdish groups, tribes, traditional structures were very much willing to work with the new Turkish leadership at the beginning, given that they share a religion. However, their demands to get a share in the new regime crushed violently. So between 1922 till 1932, 35, there were several rebellions, dozens of Kurdish rebellions, 3-4 major uprisings, all of which were violently crushed. So the pacification of the Kurdish traditional social structures, political voice also was a great opportunity for the Turkish state formation. Also, the renegotiating the role of religion in society was also another opportunity. So it was the vacuum created by the Great War, especially the British need to eliminate a caliphate, a centralized caliphate for the Muslims. British really eager to eliminate that, and the new regime, new Republican regime, abided with that. They said, sure, why not? So that the renegotiation of the religion in society also created a tremendous opportunity. And finally, we should never forget this. You know, people always ask me that question. Well, after all, Kumru, if you look at the Middle East, the only stable regime is Turkey compared to, you know, Libya, Iraq, Syria, whatever. Well, guess what? Unlike Libya, Syria, Iraq, Turkish Republic inherited all the important centralized state organizations and institutions of 500 years of empire. That's a tremendous resource. So that resource was sorry, extremely well used by the Turkish Republicans, so that they ended up creating this much more stable yet one-party regime at the time. Now, what did this mean? What, of course, if a war, end of Great War, created opportunities, of course, Kurds were aware of those opportunities too. So Kurds or Armenians, they also attempted several times to renegotiate the terms of the new settlement and new regimes in the Middle East. And Kurdish uprisings at the time were not so much only defending the traditional structures. Most of them were trying to defend the traditional structures, defend their tax structures, defend their military structures. But at the same time, also there were Kurdish mobilizations that were candidates for a more secular, more modern new regime. As example of these both two different types, Sheikh Zayed movement can be seen as an uprising to defend the traditional structures of Kurdish society, whereas the Ararat rebellion was definitely a modernizing rebellion. The leadership was the same Ottoman officers, among which the founders of the Turkish Republic came from. That's why the Ararat rebellion took a longer time, negotiations took a much longer time, and eventually, at least the leadership of the Ararat rebellion were not murdered the way the other Kurdish, the leadership of the other Kurdish rebellions. They were sent to exile, but of course that ended up in the massacre of people of Zilan. And I call it massacre, but many scholars, many researchers call it another genocide, because the civilians, the Kurdish civilians in the aftermath of the Ararat rebellion were murdered whether or not they were supporting the rebellion. So this is the memory of the Kurdish peoples. I'm not going to call it a nation yet, but this, because nation is also a product, just like Turkish nation was a product of all these processes. So these are all the memories of the Kurdish peoples that at the time of a turning point in the region, they participated, they demanded, they made claims, they protest, and they were crushed in the most violent ways you can imagine at the time. We are still trying to, I mean, I know the world is more interested how, the denial of the Armenian genocide in Turkey is very important, of course, obviously, but at the same time, what actually happened with the Kurdish rebellions is equally hushed down and shut up. So that was, so that moment of disciplining, as the Turkish state called, disciplining of the Kurdish tribes, they called it. And the reason why Kurdish tribes were supposed to be disciplined, because this is one of the biggest lies, that they were not modern enough. They were just primitive, so they needed to be disciplined. This is far from truth, because there were secular modern leadership as much as there were traditional leadership, same as how the Turkish Republicans collaborated both with the traditional segments of the society as much as they collaborated with the modernist segments of the society. So in that sense, Kurds were ready to open up a space for themselves. They participated, they negotiated, and they were crushed violently. From then on, what we're seeing is, in the name of, allow me to say that from 1940s on, in the name of stability and peace and less violence, what we see is Kurdish intellectuals and local leaders trying to participate to the democratic processes to open up space for themselves or for their actually one of the interesting things that I came across during my research, and this is from a Kurdish politician. He told me that they used to go to the countryside and ask the Kurds, the local people, what they want, and they would say, well, we want hospitals, we want roads, well, we want factories for employment, And then the Kurdish politician would say, how about being able to speak Kurdish freely? And they would say, yeah, sure, why not? So this was actually an interesting moment of being able to incorporate and integrate, assimilate, if you like to call it, I don't, but the Kurdish population into the Turkish democratization process. That didn't work. Why? Because democratic participation in Turkey was never really properly experienced, neither rule of law nor democratic participation. So that brings us to 1980 military coup, where almost all Kurdish attempts to participate to the democratic processes were crushed. After that, Kurds did not give up. They ended up creating one party to another. Each one of them were shut down just only because they mentioned the name Kurdish. You know, when I was young, there were no Kurds in Turkey. They were just Mountain Turks only. So I don't know if you remember this, but when Saddam Hussein attacked Kurds in northern Iraq, and the Kurdish populations overnight migrated, millions of them migrated into Turkey, hundreds, thousands of them migrated into Turkish territory. The Turkish TV said that, okay, the Turkish planes are throwing leaflets to the population in 3 languages: Arabic, Turkish, and a local language. Right. So this is a humanitarian crisis. This is a moment of humanitarian crisis. It's in the late 1980s, and even then, the Turkish TV could not say that the 3rd language was Kurdish, so they didn't exist. But what happened is that throughout 1980s and 1990s, Kurdish politicians and intellectuals and leadership forged alliances with the Turkish left, Turkish intellectuals, to create one political party after another, all of which were shut down. And so during that period, of course, we have this other mobilization that was the emergence of PKK as a viable voice for the Kurds. Now, the biggest problem during that time between those legal pro-Kurdish parties and PKK was that the legal ones were constantly accused for being the mouthpiece for PKK. That was exactly not understanding what was happening, because PKK on one hand and these formal legal democratic political parties on the other hand, they were speaking to the same public. It was the same public, same people, same social groups that they were speaking to. So they were seeking support from the same people with the similar memory. So in that sense, it was not surprising that they spoke similar languages. That did not mean that they have organic networks happening, but they were speaking to the same public. But all those parties were shut down one after the other, but the Kurds never gave up being participants of the Turkish formal legal parliamentary democracy. And here we are now. The majority of the Kurdish politicians are one more time in jail for trying to participate to Turkish parliamentary democracy, which is now not really, it cannot even be called democracy anymore, just some sort of parliamentarism. So this is the long view I have. I don't know if this says something new. I consider this as this is the background to which we're operating.
Absolutely, thank you. A follow-up to this, I wanted to ask something that is mentioned in Öcalan's writings. He is talking about some speeches from Kemal during the period of the so-called War of Independence, and the appeals that he is making to the Kurdish population, that that there is a recognition of the Kurdish population and an appeal to them to participate in this war for an independent Turkey, and even a discussion of a potential sort of regional autonomy situation after the fact. And then after 1923, this rollback on that to sort of consolidate state power and as part of this unitary nation building process that you were speaking about. I was wondering, and on top of that, there's this role played by the Kurds in the Armenian genocide, that you brought up before, the importance of that for the Turkish state formation. So I was wondering if you could speak a bit about, a bit more about that role of trying to appease, or even could say manipulate, the Kurdish population on behalf of, say, Kemal, or the leadership of this burgeoning Turkish state in the Turkish state and Turkish nation formation process.
No, I think that's of course very important, because I mean during the Ottoman modernization, of course the Kurdish structures, Kurdish political and social structures, always played a very important role. Not always in a acceptable way, if we think about the Armenian genocide. What was Mustafa Kemal doing when he was appeasing the Kurdish traditional structures? I mean, I can't read his mind, but definitely what we can note is that that was a moment of acknowledgement that the nation building and state formation is going to happen together. But what happened is that it was some sort of, that's why you know, even today we don't like the Turks and Kurds. The Kurds don't like to be called as brothers, because even at the time, the Kurdish groups were seen as a little brother to be manipulated by the new modernist Turkish state formation, and Kurds understandably resisted. Like I said before, Kurds had not only had traditional structures, traditional groups, but they also had modernist, Republican, secular groups as well. So they tried to be equal partners in this negotiation. So I think Öcalan is referring to that moment of acknowledgement, and then defeat and elimination of that acknowledgement. Why? Because if you are not willing to accept to be the little brother in this negotiation, and by the way, I don't know, I can comfortably say that there were some Kurdish tribal leaders, traditional tribal leaders, who accepted to be the little brother in this new formation. So especially the conservative Kurdish tribal leaderships, they always collaborated with the Turkish Republic. So they accepted, but some other, I'm not going to talk about majority and minority here because we don't know that, but many others refused to be the little brother in the state formation, and they become the resistance groups and the crushed groups and the defeated groups. So I don't know if this answers your question, but we have to acknowledge and we have to understand, and this is something Erdogan is building on too right now, that within the Kurdish population, there has always been collaborators with the ways of the Turkish state formation. They still exist. Now those groups are in Erdogan's party, in AKP right now. So in that sense, this is what's interesting and what needs to be talked about. And I know that you guys are talking about this a lot, and we are witnessing how the Turkish society is also changing. And maybe that comes to your national consciousness question, that the society is changing, the society is renegotiating the role of the language, role of women, for example, role of religion. So they have been going through this very productive process of who we are and what we want to do. So the elections in 2017, the June elections and the November elections were a very important moment of how the conservative segments of the Kurdish society first decided to work with HDP, and then they went back to their almost 100 years old trenches and joined forces with AKP. So that reality of the Kurdish society should never be forgotten, because not all Kurdish groups are anti-Turkish state. They have been, there is a long tradition of working with the Turkish state. So in that sense, a very important negotiations and bargainings are going on within the Turkish society and also among the Turkish politicians as well. I mean, that's why Kurdish Freedom Movement is a people's movement. In that sense, it incorporates groups from different segments of that society, which shows us how vibrant and how developed and how modern Kurdish society is in that sense.
Absolutely. And this actually segues well into another question I wanted to ask you. You have raised this issue, we could say, Turkish national imaginary today under the AKP-MHP regime. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the policy of the current regime is referred to as a neo-Ottoman policy, and there is reference back to this the National Pact and these extended borders of Turkey that was set by the final act of the Ottoman Parliament, right? That includes parts of northern Syria and northern Iraq. I was wondering if you could say a little bit what you make of that idea, the neo-Ottoman conception and description.
Neo-Ottomanism is just that. It's an imagination. Mm. I seriously doubt that those people who really support neo-Ottomanism or advocate neo-Ottomanism have truly an understanding of what the different moments of Ottoman Empire were. I mean, sometimes that Ottoman Empire turns out to be a heroic warfare story. Sometimes it turns out to be some religious mismatch that's more similar to Saudi Arabia than the Ottoman practice, historical practice. Sometimes it's just a matter of cooking, which I like that part very much. So neo-Ottomanism, politically, I mean, domestic politically and socially, is just that. Everyone has their own definition of whatever it is. Okay, but neo-Ottomanism can be a territorial claim. It's a claim that we want to revoke all those territories. Now, so that's basically criticizing the post-Great War settlements and trying to revoke those post-Great War settlements. I mean, a nation state is like making yogurt. You make yogurt from milk, but you cannot go back to milk again. It's not possible. So in that sense, I don't see that. I don't see that evoking a glorious past will convince the populations of those territories to be part of that partially glorified past. I mean, come on, how about Balkans? Come on, let's get the Balkans back. Yeah. I mean, there are more Ottoman works in the Balkans than in Iraq. Mm. So let's get that back. I would go for that. No, I won't. But I mean, so this is a partial project that has nothing to do with past, but has a lot to do with the ambitions for future. And every now and then. This again. I'm sorry for giving all these historical examples, but when Cairo and Egypt was given to Muhammad Ali by the governor of Egypt by the British, Muhammad Ali thought that, well, why not? I'll go all the way to Ankara, from Damascus all the way to Ankara, and took control of all those territories since the British are backing me up. Well, it was first the British who told Muhammad Ali, stay put. We want you to take charge of Cairo. So in that sense, neo-Ottomanism a la AKP is nothing but, when they were enjoying some sort of international recognition and support, they thought that they could use this as an opportunity to evoke some glorious past. But then, they were told by the same global powers to stay put and let's see if you can provide some sort of stability and control in the territory that you're already controlling, which they failed. So I think, okay, I don't know if I'm having a big mouth right now, but I think neo-Ottomanism is practically dead.
Mm.
I don't think, I mean, every now and then they might again come and make that claim. I mean, for example, I thought that last week was the great moment to kind of make some cross-border claims again, because the economy was going downhill, unemployment, poverty, the state of Turkish currency, Turkish lira. So I said, okay, all right, another attack to Kurds is coming in the name of, it didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, it's the cross-border ambitions of AKP, it seems to me, have been, I don't know if I'm too early to say this, but has been crushed by the global powers that stay put and see what you're capable of doing domestically, kind of. So I don't, am I too early to say this? But I think neo-Ottomanism is. Neo-Ottomanism was never, neo-Ottomanism never was, and I think it's crushed. It was an imagination and an ambition. I don't think it's likely that it can come back. Right.
Well, that's very, very interesting. If I might just ask a follow-up on this last point about the cross-border ambitions. Over the past number of years, we've seen quite a number of cross-border excursions or interventions across Syria and Iraq, but also into Nagorno-Karabakh, Libya, elsewhere, right? And most recently, there has been, after 2019 in Syria, there's this, the agreement with Russia and the United States. There's no more, stay there for now. Don't cross these boundaries we've made in this agreement. Do you think that was the moment that these cross-border ambitions have been crushed, as you said, or?
Most likely. I mean, it was established during that time. It was established that the role of Turkey is nothing but being a subcontractor. So as long as Turkey fulfills its task as a subcontractor in the region, especially in Libya, I think I would say, or sometimes in Iraq too, or maybe Syria. Yeah, I mean, we can count them, all of them. As long as it fulfills its task as subcontractor, Turkey will still be instrumental in cross-border actions. But exactly in those moments, it became clear that the limits are set by the global powers, and the domestic tales that the government is telling to its people are not to happen. The Kurdish issue was and still is, and in that sense, even in that sense, in this new geopolitics, it's a national security issue. So Turkey will be allowed to do cross-border actions as long as it can formulate them as national security issues.
Here they use the rhetoric of the war on terror, right?
Yeah, exactly, war on terror. But neo-Ottomanism, forget it. It's not coming back.
And to clarify, when you say subcontractor, is that for NATO or for global powers in general?
Look, I'm not very clear. You have to talk to an IR person. I'm not very clear what NATO's ambitions are in the Middle East, other than stopping Russian expansion or Putinist expansion. So I'm not so sure about. I cannot speak to that. So in that sense, yes, in that sense, to stop any form of Russian expansion and influence in the region, yes, Turkish forces are being used, but at the same time, Turkey is an independent actor. They can always negotiate with Russia, so that complicates the matters all the time. But none of these negotiations and complications can really create the kind of opportunities that were there for Mustafa Kemal in 1920s.
Right.
But let me just say this, Erdogan keeps invoking that war of liberation or war of independence. I mean, in Turkish it's war of liberation, not war of independence, but in English we translate it as war of independence, which is wrong. Recently, I think since 1916, 17, Erdogan keeps using that rhetoric of war of liberation. So he's trying to identify, so we're not at neo-Ottomanism anymore. now we are at the moment of war of liberation, meaning the opportunities of the Great War. There's vacuum in the clash between Russia and United States, and they're both mutual inability to really control the region. So he's making this claim that we can assert ourselves during this war of liberation. But again, even that rhetoric has fallen flat, because recently the war of liberation is taking place against the domestic population rather than any. This is what was interesting last week. I'm sorry I'm bringing it to last week, because last week was a very interesting moment in Turkey that, really incredible things happened with Turkish economy, Turkish currency. And usually I would wake up in the morning and hear some politicians talk about external enemies, the foreign powers. None of them. We haven't heard any one of those things. So clearly the rhetoric of foreign enemies, external enemies is not working anymore. But we are still at the moment of war of liberation. Against whom? That's a big question that's going on right now in Turkey, clearly against its own population. I don't know if you want to come to this point in our conversation.
Yeah, well, it is a very good segue to speak a bit more about the present situation in Turkey. How in this light, right? There has been an unfolding economic crisis, and as you said, last week was a pivotal point in that. And given the rest of the context we've just been discussing, how do you view the prospects for democratization in Turkey at this point in time under Erdogan, under AKP-MHP, and specifically also the prospects for a peaceful resolution of the Kurdish question?
Okay. Now, Turkey now is moving from tyranny to despotism. I would call it tyranny for the last couple of years, since Gezi maybe. It was a tyranny because there was still a majority supporting the non-democratic regime. The opposition was in jail, but I mean, people call it majoritarian parliamentarism. I call it tyranny because clearly it was the decisions were made only and only by one leadership. So it was a tyranny, but now it seems like since last week, this is despotism. Despotism meaning that you do not really care much about who your popular base is. Now you have to silence your popular base. These are very old-fashioned definitions. I did not invent them. Because Erdogan's popular base is now, I was never rushing into this conclusion for decades, because it seemed that Erdogan seemed to recover from all the crises because his base was relentless and they had an unwavering support. However, right now, I think, how do I get the indications that support is eradicating? There was this performance of a national security national security institution in Turkey, which is a very important institution in Turkey, especially for my generation, because in my generation, these were the military powers, and the generals would come and make a declaration and we would all be quiet, because clearly that was a finger against everyone, including the politicians, including the capitalists, and also the protests. So to my generation, that's what that National Security Council meant. And now last week, the National Security Council, which is now a civilian council, it's no longer a military council. There are more ministers there than the generals. And the National Security Council spoke exactly with the same words of Erdogan about the Turkish economy. Now, this was a performance, because National Security Council is no longer an independent autonomous body that kind of balances and guards the regime. It is now another institution that supports this one-party regime. However, what's interesting is that now economy is defined and established as a national security question. Now, given that the moment economy becomes a national security question, then you cannot ask for better wages, you cannot ask for free markets, free quote unquote, but whatever. So where are we going to see the political expressions of the democratic forces that are going to open up more participation, more voice, hence democratization in Turkey? Mm-hmm. Now, so in that sense, I think I might be wrong here, but I think Erdogan cornered the opposition one more time by declaring economy a national security question. But by doing that, he also declared a despotic regime that not even economic decisions are going to be questioned and argued and negotiated. So in that sense, what does this mean for democratization in Turkey? My question to you, where are the democratic forces? I don't like asking this question, but I want to ask this question.
If I might, on this topic, then segue to the Kurdish movement, that their approach in the present situation, it seems from their statements and their actions and so on, is that, of course, they their primary focus in Turkey is a peace process with the government, and that they and there is, of course, an ongoing hot conflict with that. That they are viewing this unfolding crisis in Turkey and viewing these two as connected, as you said, this a national security issue against their own population, and that this crisis is building to a point where it will be no longer tenable to continue that way, or Erdogan or whoever will no longer be able to keep power and continue that conflict, and that will force a peace process. How do you view that idea?
Well, I mean, for a long time, and I'm sure you're fully aware of this, that the moderate religious Islamist party emerged as the only partner for the Kurds to negotiate a peace settlement, a peaceful resolution. So that was a moment of opening up. That was a moment of hope. When you're negotiating peace or democracy, I come from an opinion that I don't really care who your partners are, because it's a moment of negotiation and you never know, because usually during negotiations, there's always a third thing that happens rather than anything either one of the parties want. So that was a moment of hopefulness, and I do agree, and this is what we wrote in our article on about Kurds and Gezi. It was a very typical moment that yes, AKP was a partner in negotiating peace, but let's not forget what negotiation means. Negotiation does not mean that merely happily hanging together either. So and that's one part that the Turkish establishment could not understand. That it was a very dynamic moment. But what's interesting, and this is the only Ottomanism that I see around there, the very strong state tradition, that the whole peace process was kidnapped by the traditional state forces, because again, that negotiation, that peace process was seen as a threat to the national security of Turkish nationhood and Turkish state. So in that sense, I mean, Erdogan said that the peace process was over a couple of years ago. It has been over. The negotiation, one of the negotiating parties have drastically changed. The alliances of AKP drastically changed. AKP is now working very closely with the traditional forces in Turkish state that are for the unitarian state, that are for the welfare of the state rather than the welfare of the society and people's participation. So
I mean to cut you off, but in my understanding, part of that change in alliance came about precisely from their engagement in the negotiations, and that the destabilization that they felt from their hold on power forced them to make that alliance with the
much better said. Exactly. So in that sense, AKP is no longer, or Erdogan is no longer the partner that the Kurds were negotiating or a peaceful resolution to the conflict. It was more, I mean, I think since Afrin, Turkey declared that they are back into military conflict and confrontation. That's where they are. And I think, look, I'm not going to say, but I think maintaining a military conflictual status quo is much preferable for the national interest of Turkish state than actually seeking a peaceful resolution. So we're back to 1990s. We are back to 1990s, and that's not Ottomanism at all, but it's the Turkish state reasserting itself for the unitarian state.
Makes sense. So to transition slightly, as you mentioned a bit before, the Gezi protests. As I mentioned in the introduction, you are the co-editor of a book entitled Everywhere Taksim, about the 2013 protest movement in Turkey. Can you first give us a very brief overview of the 2013 events and the protest movement, and say how you understand its significance and how it bears on the present situation, or the lead up to the present situation, as well as its relationship with the Kurdish question, the Kurdish movement?
Okay, well, again, this is like okay, too many things in one question, but okay, I'll try. Yeah. Look, Gezi was a very inspirational moment, and that is what it was. It was an inspirational moment, period. So from then on and in the future, people will be invoking certain things that took place at Gezi and in the form of protest, or in the form of imagining alliances, in the form of imagining a future together. So it's going to be an inspirational moment, but I don't think we will be able to recreate that moment, because that was a time of clear realliances that were taking place. In a way, AKP entered to the Turkish politics as a very dynamic force, with a very dynamic alliance with the Gülen movement, and so that dynamism was reshuffling what was going on, and that reshuffling was at least socially and culturally upsetting many segments of the population. But the problem was, and politically even, but the problem was economically, AKP was still in charge. So yes, it's before then and even today, there is this recirculation of capital in Turkey that's taking place. The capitalist classes are changing. That is a very important and a very dynamic process as well. But at the time, this ability to realign of the forces, of the cultural and social forces against possibly upcoming AKP regime was a very dynamic moment. So that's what brought those people together. I call that, I mean, you know, it was a redefinition of what our collectivity was. So who's going to define our collectivity? Because it seemed like there was this idea that AKP is trying to redefine the collectivity in Turkey as this Islamist brotherhood union. But what kind of collectivity, what kind of nation are we? Now, what happened in Gezi was very important because I don't know if this makes sense in English-speaking public, but there's this one nationhood that looks at the past and says, we are the descendants of this glorified nation, that I call that evoking nationhood. And that's what the Kemalist nationhood was. We are this children of war of independence, liberation, that's evoking nationhood. And Gezi was a future-oriented nationhood, which is, we want to have this collectivity. In this collectivity, we want to be able to join forces with people of different segments, different colors. So it was a more diversified collectivity, which I called invoking nationhood. So that was a very interesting and important moment of changing the self-understanding of at least the secular forces in Turkey, that we want a more diversified collectivity. We do not want a new uniformity that comes from AKP, because old uniformity was this Kemalist uniformity. AKP tried to replace that with an Islamist identity. And Gezi was saying that, no, we're invoking a new type of collectivity. That's inspirational. That's inspirational. And it's influential and inspirational, and I'm sure it left an impact. And listen, I have AKP to thank for that, because AKP's policies ended up creating that sort of a protest. So in that sense, it was good. It was good. But yeah, that was a moment of realignment, and using the sources of this government power, AKP came out of that realignment, not spotless, came out of it by eliminating its alliance with the Gülenes and realigning itself with the old-fashioned state forces, because clearly the Islamist idea, uniformity, was not going to work. So now it's the old-fashioned authoritarian uniformity that it changed. Now, this became a much more productive moment for the Kurdish movement. Why? I totally understand the hesitance of the Kurdish movement in the beginning, because after all, AKP was their partner in negotiating peace. So they were hesitant in that sense. That's an understandable situation. But on the other hand, this was a protest that fit to many of the claims of the Kurdish movement as well, from diversity to economic and cultural demands. So in that sense, they wavered this politically not hesitant. We called it a strategic ambiguity, but tactical support. So they ended up. So that's a very productive, very dynamic moment, and we should never forget that. If you read the minutes of the İmralı conversations between Öcalan and Kurdish politicians, it was at that moment, at the end of that summer or during that summer, they decided that there's a need for a new political party that is going to align itself with the forces of Gezi. So in that sense, I can say that the biggest beneficiary of Gezi were the Kurdish movement, which realigned itself with the Turkish non-existent left. I'm sorry to say that. Yeah. I know I feel very bad. No, you're laughing. That makes me feel very bad. But
yeah, I understand. But I hear you. Yeah.
But as an idea, that was a very important idea, which somehow challenged some segments of the Kurdish nationalists as well, like and I'm sure you're aware of that, many Kurds are saying that Turkish democracy in Turkey is not should not be our concern. I'm going to disagree with that perspective because politics is a matter of resource. These are resources, these are arenas that we are, after all, at the end of the day, we're trying to establish ourselves as citizens of whatever political, vis-a-vis whatever political regime. So as Kurds, as Turks, as sentient beings, we're trying to open up space for ourselves to speak up. And that's how HDP was created. And that's how Demirtaş's leadership was created, which is very much challenged by, not only by the Turkish state, but also some Kurds as well, which is an understandable dynamic process right now.
Sure. One point I wanted to mention there is, you mentioned that about this Kurdish nationalist tendency that would, you know, it doesn't, we're not concerned with what happens in Turkey, we're not for democratization of Turkey. But of course the Kurds are, I don't have to tell you, are very far from a homogenous group, but that the official line of the Kurdish movement is democratization of Turkey, and that they have the HBDH alliance with at least that segment of the marginally existent Turkish left to non-existent Turkish left that advocates for democratization of Turkey and democratic autonomy in Kurdistan. So there is that, the Kurdish movement takes that approach, and one that aspires to a human collectivity of diversity and cohabitation. But there are, of course, very other elements that are not so. Yeah.
But I mean, let me just be an advocate here that democracy in the most remote part of the world, let's stop calling it democracy, let's call it people's participation to political decision making. People's participation in political decision making, any remote part of the world ends up being useful for all of us. So in that sense, I don't think, and this is my position, regardless of one group's aspirations for its cultural rights, national rights, which I do support, but I don't think we should shy away from opening up any form of political participation. The entire world was happy when Trump lost the elections, not only because US is an important political actor, but also because American public showed that it could be done. It's possible, however difficult it was, and it still is. So in that sense, the democratization of Turkish state does not concern us. Is a pretty backward position. Democracy everywhere concerns us. People's participation everywhere has to concern us. We have to sit down and discuss the ways and hows and the forms and structures of that participation and our role in that participation, rather than just turning our back to that.
I agree wholeheartedly, genuinely. I mean, I myself, I'm not Kurdish, I have no ties to the region or anything, but it is precisely because of the sentiment that democracy or democratization, increasing participation of peoples in social and political processes anywhere and everywhere is important for everybody. So absolutely, fully agree. To transition to the final question, I would like to ask you the final topic. Another central element or topic in your work is women in the Muslim world and violence against women as well. Can you tell us a bit about how you see the situation concerning violence against women in Turkey today? And there's the withdrawal from the Istanbul Convention some time back, and then as well on the flip side, a bit about how you view the Kurdish women's movement and their project of women's liberation.
First of all, I want to make a little correction. The course I'm teaching is, and I created and I developed and I'm teaching, is called Women in Muslim Worlds. There's no such thing as one Muslim world. There are several Muslim worlds, and it's very diverse. The practices are diverse. And when I say women in Muslim worlds, I don't necessarily mean only women who are Muslim. I mean also women who are of different beliefs and faiths who live in the Muslim world. So we're dealing with a plurality of who we are. And again, okay, where to start? First of all, we have to understand that women's struggle in itself, as everybody now, I hope everyone acknowledges, is a very unique struggle, because women do not only protest traditional structures, but they also try to reshape the new structures. They try to find a position for themselves in those new structures. Some scholars call it negotiating the third space, which is neither what the old gatekeepers are saying nor what the new gatekeepers are trying to say, but women are trying to negotiate a third space, a new space. Now, well, going back to Kurdish movement, it is extremely, I mean, not only what's happening in Rojava right now, but what has already been taking place domestically in the Kurdish cities in Turkey were already, before even Rojava, were extremely inspirational, that women were actively present and participating, not only protesting against the traditional structures, that's a very important thing in Kurdish society, but also redefining the new spaces that were opened up by the freedom movement. So in that sense, even before Rojava, Kurdish women's presence, which can be seen by the leadership within HDP and even before HDP. Oh, by the way, I have to tell you this. This is like a kind of promotion. Right now, a group of Kurdish scholars are translating a collection by Gülten Kışınak into English. So the book will probably come next year. So I just participated, just translating only one of them, but it's done by a translation collective, and there you can see how the Kurdish movement pioneered by these pioneer women of different parts of the Kurdish society, how they got together, resisting to very, very different political and social and cultural climates, and they ended up creating this mobilization. However, the sad part about this book is that all the participants are now in jail, or until recently were in jail, including the editor Gülten Kışınak. So this is a very important mobilization of women redefining the day and the present and the future. So in that sense, I find that a very important, and I don't think that this may be defeated in the short run, but in the long run, it is going to have serious impacts in that sense. But we should not forget one thing. When we study Kurdish mobilization in the past, especially during the 1920s, between the two world wars, we see the presence of women, active presence of women in all those mobilizations. One of the things that I do is that I try to show, not only myself, but some other scholars too, the participation of women in the Ararat Rebellion, very significant. Not only tribal women, also secular women, also modern women, how they were part of those mobilizations, not only just supporters, but also as activists, as much as the men let them do. But they are the agency of women, the agency of Kurdish women can be seen, has to be detected throughout history. So we didn't discover the Kurdish woman's agency like in Rojava. So we have to establish that. That's very important. But of course, the visibility and the presence of women in Rojava are very important. Now, when it comes to Turkey, and it is first of all, I never thought that the violence against women in Turkey increased recently. It only became more visible recently. The violence against women in Turkey was always there, women were always murdered by people who are close to them for decades, for if not centuries. So I think the visibility does not make it, is not a sign of increase. However, having said that, what's important is that now there is a climate of an impunity with Turkey leaving that international treaty. That impunity is being established, that that we are going back to our more male-dominated social and cultural structures. I don't think it's possible. That is because the feminist forces have been active, not only feminist movement, women's movement, not all of them are feminists, have been active since 1980s. This was, if the Kurdish movement Kurdish movement was produced by the conditions of the prisons of the military coup, the feminist movement was produced by the inability to have any other political venue to speak up in 1980s. So in that sense, I don't think that, yes, there are some impediments, but I don't think we can turn the clock back again. As you know, officially, Turkey is still part of that treaty. Officially, Turkish women and lawyers can still seek venues to impose the treaty. But however, yeah, the government is saying that or encouraging the society that we're going back to our own ways. Our own, who defines who we are is very important. It's no longer a male defined who we are. Even Erdogan's daughter herself does not agree with that sort of definition of male-dominated society. So in that sense, it's very concerning. It's very upsetting. But I think a few minutes ago we were laughing about the non-existent Turkish left, but Turkish women's movement, and I can comfortably say that there's even certain alliances between Turkish and Kurdish women's movement is alive and pretty present and resourceful, and we're hearing its voice all the time. So I'm very optimistic about that. That's the only part that I'm very optimistic about.
That is so important. Absolutely. I mean, we've talked about many very large topics and covered a lot of ground, but I think with that, unfortunately, we have run out of time.
Okay.
Thank you so much for speaking with us. Are there any final thoughts you would like to leave us with in closing?
Connor, I'm very impressed by the work you guys are doing. So thank you very much for making me part of this. I don't know if my contribution is as important as what you are doing in updating the present day struggles that are going on. So thank you for your work.
Well, thank you so much for your kind words. And what I would say, just from the little that I have learned with my involvement in this work, is it really, it takes all kinds and it takes all parts, and we all have a part to play in this. And what you have shared today has been very insightful, very informative, very thought-provoking, both about the history and the present moment and where things will go from here. So thank you very much for taking the time.
Keep up this conversation. Okay. Thank you very much, Connor. Thanks a lot.